Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews. This week I have 5 new LitRPG titles just for you folks at home, and that includes The Crafting of Chess, a LitRPG adventure, Supermage, Rise to Omniscience, book number 1. Then after that it'll be The Black Turtle, the Artar Chronicles, book number 2. Then it'll be Changing World, The Fast Flow, and last it'll be Dungeon World, a Dungeon Core experience. And so I have 5 new reviews for you. Before we get into that, though, we're going to go, of course, into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with a great story for Matt Denneman, who's the author of the Dominion of Blade series. He'll be at Emerald City Comic Con this weekend, March the 5th, 14th, which is today, to the 17th, which will be the end of the weekend, at booth HG307. That'll be Emerald City Comic Con 2019, which is one that's being recorded. He says that the booth is primarily devoted to his artwork because he's an artist, like actual creating art as well as an author, and that's the main focus of the booth. But he does say that he will have some print books for fans to purchase if they wish to. He'll be happy to sign any copies that fans might have of his stuff or anything else. I'm sure he'll be happy to sign stuff for you. So go on by that. It's going to be booth HG307 again. It's way the heck in the Mac apparently. Go say hello to Matt for me. Go buy some of his amazing art because it generally is really, really good. It's like, okay, he's an author, he's an artist. It seems like it's unfair, but he does well for himself. So go say hi to Matt for me. Okay, also in LitRPG news, Jeffrey Falkenlogue, author of the Slime Dungeon Chronicles, is continuing his work on this side-scroller platform game that is based on his intellectual property, the Slime Dungeon Chronicles, and he's recently released some really good-looking, really fun character and sprite art that he's used for the inspiration and for artists to make the sprites he's using. I'm just showing this off because I'm a fan of the concept in general of somebody who's already done good author work using that intellectual property and making a video game out of it. Like it's a LitRPG inspired game, and all LitRPG is inspired by video games. So it's like this weird cosmic circle that I'm super proud of my friend for doing. And just the artwork here is just like super. It's fun. That's all I got to say. It's you get to see some hints at some of the bosses that are going to be in the game, some of the monsters and stuff, and even some of their like animations that somebody's going to have to make at some point. And it's all really fun to see happen as it's going on. And of course, the author is continuing to rebuild his game. And he has like samples available if you want to go check it out, of course. And he has a whole YouTube page for like the videos of like things being made and people playing them, including I did a playtest a couple times myself, and I was like, oh, this is like legitimately challenging and kind of fun. There you go. So, but just fun stuff there. Also in LitRPG news, the latest audiobook in the Warrior Eternus series is out. It's the 4th book in that series. And Sound Booth Theaters actually made a really great trailer for it. It not only captures the neat little bits about this particular book, but also the series on the whole, which I thought was an interesting way to do it. I'm going to pull up the YouTube clip for you guys to listen to.
Even after his death, the first man's lessons continued on.
There is nothing depraved about sleeping with plenty of women, drinking tons of liquor, and enjoying all the finer points in life.
But his teachings did not perish with him.
So, do we kill one of them for show? Make sure they know what's what?
The teachings branched out and covered the first man's descendants in a blessed shade.
Well, you heard the deities. We need to press on and kill a bunch of people.
And so they made their own son.
I introduced him to one of my buddies, and Brian showed him how to handle a sword.
Except Brian was a zombie.
building fires out of lies to illuminate themselves with their own nature.
And the next thing I knew, I was in this fantasy world where she was explaining how to fight, showing me some cool moves, teaching me how to use my inventory.
Society then progressed with men fighting over possession in absence of necessity.
It knows how to make wooden spears, iron spears, steel spears, 30 different grips, and multiple different methods of decoration.
Hunting the beasts that appeared in the shadows cast by lies instead of the real game.
The NPCs? Nah, they're fine. They can be concubine 1 and 2. In fact, we can get you 10 concubines if you want.
That walked in the sun outside of the shade.
It's kind of a long and a short story.
So there you go. Actually, it's a fun little trailer that looks really good for, especially for an audiobook, introducing some visuals, but at the same time showing you all the different voices, all the different characters in the series, along with some more super fun stuff. Go check out the audiobook and, of course, the ebook for that particular series as well. And along the lines of congratulations, Dave Wilmarth, who recently wrote the Shadow Sun Survival series, has been doing super well. He apparently, I mean, it's been out for a little bit, as of like today in this writing of the podcast. That particular novel has broken into the top 200 on Amazon. It's currently at 159 on all of Amazon on the paid section, and number 1 in several like subcategories. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Dave Wilmarth, who's done an amazing job with the story, and apparently the fans and readers have responded by purchasing it and reading on Kindle Unlimited. So congratulations to you, man. We're all real proud of you. And of course, go check out the novel if you already haven't. We gave it a good review for the podcast already, which was a little bit ago. So we'll link in the show notes if you want to just click on it and go pick it up. So there you go. Okay. Also, just one last little bit of LitRPG news for the podcast. Our podcast is broadcast on so many different platforms: Facebook, on Twitter, on our own page, and of course on YouTube. Also on a bunch of podcasting as just like audio versions of the podcast. But today we're talking about the YouTube channel that we have. It's under the Geek Minds podcast name because that's the first podcast I ever made. And just this last week we hit 1,000 subscribers, and just to celebrate, we gave away 10 audiobook codes. I had people do special requests, and also just I had a list of just everybody from YouTube, also everyone from Facebook and Twitter, just put them on a big list and had a random number generator to pick out some winners. And we have the winners here. I'll be including Jacob Tanner, Chris Marmont, Logan 1228881, Timothy Olsen, Drew Cordell, JD Bugman, Matthew Montevideo, Stephen Michael Berry, and Miles Trombley. So those 10 winners get free audiobook codes, and I've sent messages to all of them. So folks, go check your emails, go check your Facebook messages to see if you got a free audiobook code from us. And thank you guys for everybody for supporting the podcast and for sharing and for viewing us for all these episodes. This is episode 162. And we, of course, have even more episodes of the Geek Bay podcast and the LitRPG audiobook podcast. So many ways that you guys help support us. And additionally, I'll have one hidden audiobook code somewhere in the podcast for this particular episode. So the first viewer that actually finds it can claim it. And that's just like an extra thank you for the people who are actually watching the show on YouTube and just live and everything. Thank you, everyone, for help supporting the podcast and helping it grow, of course. Thank you. Okay, on to stuff that is out now. These are books that have come out recently. I haven't had a chance to read them, but they are available for you to read, and that includes Vindication, the Alchemic Weaponer, Book 1. This is another expanded universe series for the Vertigan Online universe, but it is out now. Also out is The Game of Gods at the beginning, as is Historia Online Square 1. Also out is Respawn 18 and Up, Respawn series book number 3 by Arthur Stone. This is one of those LitRPG apocalypse stories where the main character, whenever he dies, resets to like a particular point in the apocalypse, and he has these different interesting adventures. It's interesting. It's also Russian translation, so you might have already read books 1 and 2. Also out is The Mayor of Newtown, a LitRPG adventure, and City of Champions Online, complete by Stuart Gross. This is actually a compilation of episodes 1 through 5 in the series. I've only read episodes 1 through 4, I believe. I haven't read 5 personally. But it's been a really interesting series. It's Stuart Gross's take on superhero based LitRPG stories, and the main character is really interesting. Interesting power sets for everybody. Some interesting kind of socio-political commentary in there as well, which won't be a fan for everybody, but it made me laugh when I read it. But it's available now as a compilation, and it's over 500 pages, and it's also in Kindle Unlimited, so definitely go check it out if you have any interest in that kind of stuff. But also out is The Idle System, a LitRPG series book number 3 that just popped up on my radar, so it's available for you to read. I really liked books 1 and 2, and I'm curious to see where book 3 goes, because it's super OP, and it kind of resets sometimes. I'm wondering where it goes. Also out though is Comet Rider, a sci-fi lit RPG series, as is Acreon Cascade, which says in its novel description that it's a LitRPG story. And the third book in the Gamer Guy series, Uploaded, is also available if you're a fan of that series. It's available for you to read. On new audiobooks, we actually have quite a few new audiobooks this week as well. Harbinger of Ash, War Eternus, book number 4 by Charles Dean. Mentioned the where I showed you the trailer for it from Sound Theater. It's out as an audiobook, of course, as is Bunker Core, by Andrew Sipple, who's the author of the Threadbare series. So if you're a fan of that, this is completely different series from that author. His take on that kind of dungeon core story that is out as an audiobook, as is the 6th book in the Realm of Archon series, the Starry Skies of Darkhan. The novel The Path, which is actually the 14th book in the author's previously established Just Cause Universe series. So this is essentially the author's take on LitRPG, but it's using kind of his characters in his already established kind of superhero world. I thought it was really nicely done. It incorporates Hindu mythology, a Hindu superpower character, and there's a bunch of interesting world building here, but it is definitely RPG. Got a good review from us. It is out as an audiobook at this point. I haven't listened to audiobooks. I can't speak for that, obviously, but I like the ebook. Also out as an audiobook is Dan the Adventurer, book number 2, Gold Girls and Glory, narrated by the amazing Andrea Parsnow. And last but not least is Oblivion's Promise, Endless Online, book number 2, is out as an audiobook. So there you go, a bunch of stuff for and audiobooks. On to upcoming LitRPG, which is just where I read off a bunch of stuff that's coming out in the near future. A few release dates have changed. March 17th, it's going to be Gunblade Crystal Shards Online, book number 4, which is a new addition to that list. So the 4th book in the Crystal Shards Online series will be out on March the 17th. March the 18th is going to be Absolute Zero Atom Online, book number 2. On March the 19th, the 5th book in the Evolution Online series, Protectors, will be out. March 22nd, the 4th Realm, which is a book in the 10 Realm series by Michael Chatfield. March 25th, The Final Trial, Level Up, book number 3. That'll be out again on March 25th. On March the 25th as well, this was actually a change in release dates. Soulcatcher, a LitRPG series universe ICS. There you go. Also out on March 27th, it'll be The Dark World Transformation, book number 2. On March the 27th as well is a new addition of the list. Lost Portals. I'm probably going to say this name wrong. I think the authors made fun of me a little bit. He teased it. Korzakian Multiverse Online, LitRPG Omniverse series, Korzakian Multiverse Online, LitRPG Omniverse. It's a long title. I'm pretty sure he's just messing with me with the long title. He seems to have a nice sense of humor. But that'll be out on March 27th. On March the 28th, they'll be reading Online Dead Man's Tale, the 2nd book in the Illusionist series. On March 29th, Shift, book number 1, Defenders of Gallowwind. On April the 1st, Into the Game, Dungeon Crawl Quest. April the 5th, Djinn Tamers. I almost messed up again, guys. It's Djinn Tamers, Rivals, a monster battling game lit adventure. It's the 2nd book in that series. April the 10th, Edge of the Abyss, Respawn Trials, book number 1. April the 11th is the 5th book in the Good Guys series called Dukes and Ladders. On April the 18th, Dragon Heart, Stone Will, a LitRPG Wuxia series. And April 22nd, it'll be Class A Threat, Discardian, book number 1. Don't let the cover fool you. I've talked to the author about this, and he's described it as a much more interesting series than the cover, even the novel description, would lead you to believe. On April 25th, it'll be the second book in the Galacticon series is finally available by Vasily Mihenko. It's called In Search of Oldans. On June 1st, it'll be Realm of Noria, book 2 in that series. And there you go, folks. That's all the stuff I know about in the near future. And of course, if you're an author who planned to publish and you don't have a pre-order up, that's perfectly fine. Just feel free to let us know. We're at LitRPG Podcast. You can email us at feedback@geekbytespodcast.com or at litrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Either way, we'll reach us or reach us on Facebook. Plenty of ways to contact us. And you can let us know that your novel's coming out. Cover art, we'll put it up on, we'll let people know that your stuff exists. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we're going to begin with The Crafting of Chess, a LitRPG adventure written by Kit Falbo. It is 291 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Nate wants more to life than moving from town to town, hustling chess with his con man grandfather, or wagering pickup games online. A new immersive game opens up the chance to bring in a steady paycheck, maybe enough to convince his grandfather to stay straight. Little does he know how his actions will change his life. Not the most engaging novel description, but I can assure you this is actually a really entertaining story, especially if you're into crafting like I am. I am so into crafting as far as like game mechanics and stories. I have crafting in every single novel that I've written because I find it so fascinating and interesting. I always personally just loved crafting in MMOs. It's just, for some reason, it feels super fun to be creator and not just a destroyer. And this totally appealed to me on that level in every single respect. And that's what the majority of the story actually revolves around, which is why I liked it so much personally. There's little to no combat in the story. So if you're looking specifically for something that has a lot of combat and fighting and action, this may not fulfill that particular need for you. There is still action. There's still conflict in this story, but it is not in the vein of like, I'm going to murder a bunch of monsters or I'm going to, a bunch of PvP or anything like that. Instead, the conflict revolves around, political conflict, personality conflicts. There is some factional stuff in the story with NPCs and also players. The main character has to fend off and manage greedy players that will betray him for a chance at his enchanted gear. And of course, people wanting to use the player who's a crafter for their own purposes when all he wants to do is kind of craft and enchant and sell his stuff at auction so he can make a living. And so there's a really interesting way of making the story interesting without necessarily having a bunch of ton of action. There's other types of conflict that are highlighted in the story. Overall, though, the big thing on the story is going to be the crafting. It has some really great details, some really great concepts about crafting and enchantment without being too realistic or boring. It still incorporates game mechanics and skill trees and abilities to make crafting interesting and to make the leveling process still RPG progressionist, even though it is still, again, mainly focused on crafting. You'll still have familiar game mechanics like stats, levels, XP, quests, and item notifications. I will note that the crafting struggling does become minimized in like the last 20% as the novel's focus shifts a little bit towards completing the plot with the Kingmaker contest in the story. And at that point, I was like, oh, I lost a little bit of interest, but still. And overall, a very entertaining story. I personally had a good time with it, but again, I'm super into crafting stories and crafting as like an interesting concept. I find that stuff super fun. That's me. So if you're not into crafting as much, it might not be as entertaining. And if you're looking specifically for something with a lot of action and a lot of like fighting, this isn't it. Again, other types of conflict, just that fighting stuff isn't a big part of the story. So for me though, it gets a score of 7.5 out of 10. That's The Crafting of Chess, a LitRPG adventure with a score of 7.5 out of 10. I had a good time with it. So there we go. Okay, next we're going to have Supermage, Rise to Omniscience, book number 1, written by Aaron Oster. It is 298 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Morgan's life is not easy. Growing up in the streets of City 4, he is constantly shunned by the other citizens. Morgan doesn't mind being ignored. What he does mind, though, are the constant beatings from the city guards due to his friendship with Sarah, the city lord's only daughter. Lord Simon wants him dead, but the laws of the kingdom are on Morgan's side, and even the guards won't kill him just for being seen near his manor. Morgan's time is running out, though. Lord Simon has deep pockets, and his last visit to the manor may just have put him over the edge. Worse, he is nearing his 16th birthday and has yet to awaken any abilities. In a world where mistakes make right, or might makes right rather, he has never been one of the mighty. What will he do when faced with a life-altering decision, and just how will his decision impact those around him? There we go. And that's the novel description. First, I'm going to say that this novel has been doing really well on Amazon. It hit the sub 200s at one point since it's been released. And I want to congratulate the author on doing well in that respect. But honestly, for me, the story just didn't work. I feel like, honestly, I've read this premise before and it was done better. The novel starts off a bit like Dante's Immortality. I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons to that story just because there are similarities, and for somebody who's read the other story first, I'm always going to be making the comparison just because of those similarities. Like this author, this story is original in the respect that it does different power system and incorporates some different story mechanics and game mechanics. I'm not saying it's like plagiarized or anything like Shape or Form, even though there are some striking similarities in some concepts. But for me, overall, it was like I kept reading this and I was like, I've read better versions of this, and that's kind of what it came down to me for. I'm going to talk about the things that are unique in this. Like Dark Dreams of Mortality, though, the beginning and the setup is very similar in that the main character is essentially worried that his powers aren't going to show in a society where everybody has them. Where everybody has like one or two powers, whether it's a mage power or a super power. They usually have one or the other, and his hasn't showed. And once his show, when he magically needs them, of course, it's shown that he has magically both, and he's potentially a Supermage, which has never been explained before this. But he has to hide them because otherwise he'll be potentially too powerful, and the powers that be might find him threatening. And in this novel, though, which is different from Dark Dreams of Mortality, is that in this particular series, the main character gets two powers. He gets mage powers and superpowers, and of course he has to train and kill and advance and escape from the bad men hunting him. And for some reason he has a lord's daughter with him, and it doesn't really make sense why he does, except that it's a conflict that's gonna follow him. And that's kind of it. That's all really the story is. There's a bit of a magical academy story also thrown in there, and a tournament. But that's kind of it. And it's not really a super complex story. And for many readers, it seems like that's more than enough. They really enjoyed it. But for me, I was like, Dante's Immortality is a much better story. And that's kind of what it came down for me a lot of times. Maybe it's unfair for me to compare this story to something I already know I really enjoy. But I couldn't help it. I kept comparing the game mechanics, and I'm like, the game mechanics here are essentially really sparse and they're really simplified. There are ranks in the story. There are increases in power based on killing and magical powers, magic and powers, I should say, that increase in rank as they're used and also as the main character absorbs different essences. But a lot of the characters in the story and a lot of the numbers, I should say, felt like they weren't really important. Like they were just kind of there. Like you saw character sheets on a semi-regular basis, but like the increases in those numbers didn't really make the main character feel more powerful. I mean, more powerful than he already was. Like when you see the character sheet for the first time, he has his superpowers and he's really overpowered, and he's beating up the other characters who are in ranks versions much more powerful than them, and not based upon the character sheets that you see, like that doesn't really make sense. But you're also not really given reference points to say that it's not. It just kind of feels wrong, for at least for me, based on like my experience with numbers and character sheets. He's at rank 0. He's beating up guards who have powers who are rank 4, rank 5, and I'm like, that doesn't really make sense to me as somebody who plays a lot of RPGs. And it kind of occurs to me like, oh, like the character sheets are just kind of there for comparative, like, oh, to show, yeah, this is kind of an RPG story where he is progressing, and stuff. But it's really more of like this overpowered superhero fantasy story. I'm like, oh, okay, that's perfectly fine as it is. But that's why it doesn't work for me particular. there really was never a lot of character depth, and I really never cared about the main character, and I never cared about most of the other characters. There's a little bit of world building in here, and there's definitely an attempt at doing so. It's just not particularly in depth. And the game mechanics for me, while they have some interesting points of like the combination of magic and superpower, they felt a little prefabricated to give the main character overpowered abilities, and there's not a lot of depth to them. Like he gets them and they're kind of set, and he doesn't like increase the amount of powers. At some point he just improves them over and over again, so he gets used to them and they become even more and more overpowered. So there really wasn't a lot of depth to the actual game mechanics in choices he could make, and as far as like getting new powers, new abilities. And again, I kept comparing it to a different story, which is Dante's Immortality, and that story definitely has a lot of variety as far as like the things the main character can do and improve and get new powers and all that good stuff. And so for me, it just didn't work. And again, it's not a bad story necessarily. It just was basically boring for me because I in my head, I was like, it's not as good as Dante's Immortality. And that's kind of what the review came down to for me. It gets the score of 5 out of 10. That's what it came down to. So it's a Supermage Rise to Omniscience, book number 1, with a score of 5 out of 10. There you go. Okay. On to The Black Turtle, the Artar Chronicles, book number 2, written by Vladimir Vasilienko. Sorry. It is 321 pages for $5.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Torn apart by life, both virtual and real, Mongoose has to gain the trust and support of his teammates and the Steelhounds by completing a perilous quest, at the same time becoming the very first to master the element of water in Artar while securing a source of real-life income. But the road he has chosen turns out to be wild and untraveled. His guildmates are assassinated, the real-life abilities are weakened, and he becomes completely broke. Trying to find a balance between his ambitions, the Steelhounds, and real life, Stan embarks on a dangerous venture, and the stakes have never been higher. So there we go. This is again a continuation of the first book, and then the series as a whole. Remember, this is actually a translation of stuff that has already been written, already has a whole like catalog of stuff in Russian, and it's just being translated into English at this point. If you don't remember book 1, this is actually a world in which there are no levels. Instead, there are different ways of progressing, like character stats and abilities, and that's how the game world goes. The main character has chosen a monk, and so you're going to get like some kung fu training stuff in here in the very beginning of this novel. And I actually thought it worked really well, but a lot of the story is slice of life. He goes on adventures, he does some stuff, and he has like these goals that he'll either accomplish or he won't for the most part. If you like book 1 in the series, you're probably going to like book 2. Actually, in this particular novel, there's a little more kung fu training and adventuring that I thought added some stuff. But again, the middle section it's mostly like actually bookended by monk stuff. So beginnings, monk stuff, end monk stuff. Middle, slice of life adventuring with his guild. And it's just good action adventure stuff. You still get your regular RPG progression with increasing powers and stats. That's all in there. It's again, the game mechanics are a little bit different. There aren't necessarily levels. There's just each class has a different way of progressing their abilities and stats. In this particular case, it's like the main character gets to absorb ki from his enemies as he defeats them, and he can use that to increase his stats, or use that same kind of ki to fund the use of his powers. And so this is an interesting resource management aspect there as well. But for me, this is just a good action adventure story. I think the new addition to this particular novel is that there are actually some significant character development using real world events. That was a nice addition to the story. So for me, overall good stuff. Gets a nice score of 7.4 out of 10. That's The Black Turtle, the Artar Chronicles, book number 2, with a score of 7.4 out of 10. There we go. Next, we have another translated novel. This one is called Changing World, The Fast Flow, which is the second book in the series, written by Sergei Katz. It is 359 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Alder's life has become a mad race against those who want him out of the world. One wrong step, one wrong error, and he may lose everything he has achieved. His patron will disappear from this world, and his newly acquired friends will lose their lives. So there we go. This was unfortunately just kind of a miss for me. I actually liked book 1. This series as a whole, though, each and every book is super slice of life. Like, you're really just following this guy as he's in this MMO world, and he just does a bunch of stuff, whether the adventures or action or finding a patron god or any of that stuff. You're really just following him all around a lot. And while that worked really well for book 1, at least in my opinion, in book 2, it breaks down a little bit, and that's mostly because of what happens in the beginning. And it's not like it's a bad beginning. It's just that the beginning was such a struggle to get through because there's the main character just kind of floats around for like 10-15% of the novel, the beginning portion of it, and there's no summary or callback to book 1, and so it's really just super challenging to reconnect to the story without. And again, for me, and this might not be the case for everybody, obviously, but for me, it's been months and months since I've read book 1, and that means for me, I've kind of read easily, 30, 40, 50 novels between those two books. So for me to recall who everybody was without any kind of reminders, it just took a really long time. And eventually it did kind of click in my brain, like, oh, that's right. That's who this character is. That's why he's here in this world. That's why he has this goal. That's why he has this patron god. And what that whole deal is. And, but it just took a really long time. And by the time it kind of clicked back in my brain, I was like, it just kind of lost me. And that's, and the rest of the novel really just kind of, there's this almost Alice in Wonderland aspect of it where the main character is like going through these different portals, through different planes and different worlds, and eventually landing back in the main game world, but, and just having these action adventure stories and a bunch of combat. And once he's there in the regular world again, okay, it's much like book 1. But again, it was just hard to reconnect with the main character and reconnect with the storyline. And that's just unfortunate. And even though, there's a really good twist ending at the end that might show potential for the next book, this book unfortunately just missed landing with me. It just didn't connect for some reason. And for me, it's a score 6 out of 10. Other readers may have different opinions, especially if you've read book 1 like really recently, like yesterday. You might actually have a much better time with the book 2 because everything is already fresh in your mind. But for me, it's been a little while. And so for me, it gets a score 6 out of 10. That's Changing World, The Fast Flow, with the score 6 out of 10. I still plan to read book 3 just to see if it gets better. And the twist was enough to kind of engage me. Like, oh, I'll give book 3 a shot. But for me, this one just didn't work. Okay, on to our next review, which is book number 5, last review, the Dungeon World, rather, a Dungeon Core Experience by Jonathan Brooks. It is 319 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Limited. And here's the author's description. In a distant world 5 times the size of planet Earth, dungeons and their dungeon cores have become the top of the food chain. Millions of dungeons inhabit the planet, utilizing the various human kingdoms as a source of much-needed mana to facilitate their own growth. In turn, the humans delve into the dungeons and acquire their power in the form of essence, which allows them to develop and enhance themselves in a multitude of different ways. It is a symbiotic relationship that has lasted centuries and has brought about a measure of peace. Far in the northern wilds, where no humans and therefore no dungeons regularly frequent, a young man is left alone when his parents are murdered suddenly and unexpectedly. Now, without friends, family, or even supplies, he embarks on a journey to find out who targeted his parents and who he needs to enact his revenge upon. Along the way, he discovers something about himself that his parents said was impossible from the moment he was born. Will he learn to control the new powers he has gained, or will his newly awakened dungeon core abilities consume him? There we go. And that's the premise of the novel. And it's actually kind of fascinating. I'll be honest, most of the beginning portion of the lore section of the description isn't revealed in the actual novel, like near the very end. But this story has some really fascinating, really interesting premises, really interesting concepts there. But I feel like they were left unfulfilled. Like there's a lot of unfulfilled potential in the story. And that's just kind of what it came down to. The main character is being, and this is only like a tiny bit spoiler. Like this is literally described in the first chapter of the story, and it's inferred heavily in the actual novel description. But if you don't want to hear it, skip it. The main character is a being that is born from 2 dungeon cores, and while he looks human, he has the creation powers of a dungeon core, only without ever needing a dungeon. And so the fact that the main character essentially becomes this adventurer who's really a dungeon core, is a really interesting concept. Like how would that work? And there was a lot. There were many times in the show I was like, I paused. I was like, and made me think like, oh, how would I do that? And how would that work out socially and sociologically? Like, oh, the main character is raised with dungeon cores, and he's never really seen a human, and he's never seen other beings besides his two dungeon core parents. And he's lived his entire life essentially in this dungeon. And even they fed him like man-made food. And how does that work socially? Like him eventually leaving the nest and finding humans that look like him. How would he interact with them? And those questions are unfortunately like really simplistically resolved, and that he doesn't have to learn anything new. He doesn't have to like study. He doesn't have to, he doesn't have this different point of view of what humans and human societies are, because it's kind of like whitewashed away saying like, oh, or some washed away saying his parents magically educated him about humans and the society and their languages. And so he adapts surprisingly quickly. And I think it was just like this weird, for me at least, a weird missed story opportunity of creating this character who essentially has the mentality of a dungeon, and that they eat humans and they eat monsters and they kill them so that they can live, and having him instead being essentially just a regular human with the same regular human mentality of like, oh, I kill to live, and it's just like, oh, it didn't work. I was like, oh, and that's how I feel about many points of the novel. Like, oh, that is potentially really cool, but the actual execution, like, left me a little disappointed, because it feels like it could have gone a really cool way, and then it didn't. So for me, on the whole, the novel really doesn't work. Although, again, there are really interesting concepts in the story that I thought were really neat. And most of it revolves around the dungeon core stuff. There's actual more dungeon diving in the story than there is dungeon. Well, there's really no dungeon creation, which is another thing I was disappointed by, because Jonathan Brooks, he has quite a few LitRPG novels, and some of them are just really dungeon core. So like a lot of the recent stuff he's written has all been dungeon core, where a dungeon core in the future or dungeon core in the past is there to create dungeons and attract adventurers. So when I saw this world, I was like, oh, that's what this is going to be. And it isn't. It's really more of a dungeon dive, where and the adventurer is this weird hybrid dungeon core human. And so that's really what it ends up being. One of on the game mechanic side, things are a little mixed, in that you get to see status sheets from the dungeon core side of things as the main character, also as his adventurer status screen as well, because eventually he does become an adventurer, and you can see other mechanics from other classes as well, and some of those aspects are neat, but you can kind of tell that the emphasis is on creating neat powers and neat abilities, and not really a balanced system. But really something fun for the story. I think one of the game mechanic aspects that is super broken in the story is the ability of the main character to create things, just like a regular dungeon one, right? But and this is again kind of spoiler, so skip ahead if you don't want to hear it. But the thing that kind of broke the story for me in a lot of ways was that the main character can recreate anything he has. Kind of has this pattern for it. If he's held it and smelt it and felt it, and he can kind of remember its creation pattern, which is really cool if you're in a dungeon and you're isolated and you're trying to attract adventurers. But in this particular story, the main character uses it essentially to create infinite money, infinite silver, infinite gold. I mean, it's limited by the fact how much money he has and other resources to do it, but essentially he creates as much as he wants, and there's really no limit to it. And that kind of becomes his secret superpower to accomplish his goals. And it made the accomplishing of those goals, which seemed really out there for him, a little, like he might have struggled for them, it made them really easy to accomplish. And a lot of that accomplishment was done in like these large swaths of summaries. And so to actually get to see the details being said, his success is summarized in a bit. And that was just kind of disappointing to me in that his powers weren't limited a little bit more. And again, that's just a personal view. I recognize that the authors have right to create any story he wants to, but from a game mechanic point of view, I was like, oh, why wasn't that ability like curtailed a little bit in that he didn't have to, like a regular dungeon, like kind of create his own mana-soaked environment to do his creation aspect? That would have balanced that out just a little bit more. But it was something that kind of broke the story for him a little bit, in that his superpower essentially became money, and infinite amounts of money to do all the things he wanted to. And it's like, oh, it kind of made the accomplishment of his goals feel just a little bit cheap or unearned in that respect. There still is RPG progression. The main character does dungeon dive, and he becomes more powerful on the dungeon side and also on this adventuring side. So it'll be a story. It just, the way it unfolded for me is just like, oh, that's so just like, oh, that didn't work for me. There is still good action scenes in the story when you see them, when they're not summarized. There's some neat character builds, and again, I really like the idea of a dungeon core adventure. That is a really interesting concept. It just didn't unfold well for me. So that's my review. It gets a score of 6 out of 10. It didn't work for me. Other people might really enjoy it. It's just, there are just several aspects like, oh, that didn't work out as well as I had hoped from those really neat concepts and premise. So there it is. This Dungeon World, the Dungeon Core experience, with a score of 6 out of 10 for me. So there you go. That's it. That's the show, ladies and gentlemen. 5 quick reviews. It wasn't a really busy publishing week apparently for me. A lot of the things come out late in the week. But that's it. Thanks for hanging out with us, folks. If you remember, if you want to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and YouTube, on Patreon, on our website, we have all the links in the show notes for you guys. Also including some other Facebook groups and pages where community members and writers and authors all congregate and talk about this thing we love, LitRPG. But for me, if you want to help support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, remember you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But the easiest way to do so is probably just to share the show, share your comments on it, comment on the show, share links, just anywhere you go. If you're a fan of the show and you like us, or if you love LitRPG, share it. That way more people know about LitRPG, more people know about the good books we talk about and we love, and it helps support everybody, authors, readers, and reviewers, of course. And until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.